They rang the church bells backward to keep the plague from hearing their names, and someone rang them again last week. Welcome to TruthfallTV. Tonight, we open a sealed history the polite textbooks refuse to touch. It began as a whisper in an archive. It ends if we're lucky without your name being called. I didn't go looking for it. It found me in a box marked Parish Miscellany, shipped from a condemned vestry outside London. Inside lay a book the size of a hand, its leather the color of old tea, its edges singed as if it had sat too close to a great fire and only just decided against dying. On its spine, impressed in hammered letters, the Dead Bell Ledger. A narrow slip of paper was glued to the first page, a librarian's quick hand in violet ink. Do not read aloud. The first entry wasn't written by a scholar, not a bishop, not a king. It came from a parish scribe named Aldrich, Winter, 1349. England was a nation of damp wool and rumor. The Black Death had taught the air to walk into rooms uninvited. Aldrich wrote by candle, the wax running down like melted bone. He recorded baptisms, marriages, and the new thing nobody wanted to name burials. Except he didn't call them burials. He called them bell days. Because in his village, Harrowfun, the dead were counted by sound. Their answer was strange and precise. Ring the church bell backward so the sickness could not follow the tone to your doorway. The bell, rung forward, called the living to worship. Rung in reverse, it confused death, sent it wandering into the fun like a drunk looking for an address that no longer existed. That would be folklore if not for the rest of the entry. Aldrich wrote, when I set down their names, the bell changed its voice without a hand to the rope. The bailiff demanded an account for inheritance, for taxes, for the solemn machinery of a kingdom that counts even when counting is cruel. Aldrich resisted. The village midwife, Myron, warned him in a voice like a woven basket. You will teach the thing to listen. But he obeyed, as most of us do when order puts on a friendly face. He listed a child, a baker, 2 shepherd brothers who sang when drunk. With each name, the air learned a word it wasn't supposed to know. At night, Aldrich woke to bells that had not been rung and ink stains on his fingers he did not remember earning. He tried an experiment. He refused to write on a Sunday. On Monday, the bailiff forced his hand. Aldrich wrote 3 names in a neat line. Before he finished the third, the bell rang backward by itself, and Myron's cottage smoke twisted into the wrong shape, the kind that meant someone was boiling water, not for soup. He closed the ledger and wrote a prayer on the outside of it, which is like whispering into a storm and asking the wind to sign for the parcel. He hid the book under a flagstone dusted with lime in the church vestry. He told nobody. He made a new ledger, a bland one, where nobody could hear the dead approach by ink. The next hand belonged to a woman named Hester Quince London, 1666. She worked with the dead when the living would not. She collected the bills of mortality, the weekly printed lists of plagues and poxes, and spectral euphemisms that let the city pretend it understood its own endings. On a night when London burned like the underside of God's hand, Hester found the ledger in a church that would not be a church by morning. Flames licked hymnals. The little book sat unburned on the altar like an animal pretending to be a stone. Hester thumbed the pages and saw Aldrich's neat lines, then newer entries her own time. The city had given up ringing the dead bell backward. The fire rang every bell at once. Still, she wrote that when the printers set the weekly mortality list, men dropped to the street like coins escaping a hole in a pocket. Names printed, spoken, sold for a penny became siren calls. Apprentices carried folded sheets down alleys, shouting numbers. Hester watched the numbers answer back. She tried to burn the ledger. It refused. It flared, then dimmed, and in the glow she saw the outline of her own name, Hester, waiting on a page that had not yet been written on. She rolled the cask into the Thames where the river could decide if history wanted another mouthful of secrets. It should have stayed there. The ledger surfaced in a trunk of oddments auctioned by a pawnbroker with a scar in the shape of a question mark on his cheek. It passed from hand to hand until 1918, when a nurse named Elsie Gray found it under a cot in a field hospital in Étaples, France. If 1349 was a whispering plague and 1665 was a city trying not to say the word fire, 1918 was a train that never stopped, loaded with boys who had learned to be men between shells. Elsie wrote that the hospital director insisted on order, which meant lists, which meant typewriters clacking like teeth. She was put in charge of the telegram table. She typed the names of the fallen and of those who would soon be. She felt the guilt in her wrists. The ledger sat open between the typewriter and the candle as if it were the third hand in the work. When she typed quickly, the room warmed. When she paused, the candle guttered and shadows lengthened into the long, thin shapes of people who should not have been standing in a room with her. She slowed down. The director slapped the table. Elsie stapled the ledger closed. She wrapped it in linen and tucked it into a crate labeled surgical gauze. She wrote on the crate in pencil, "Do not open." She died 3 days later, the kind of death that arrives dressed as a fever and leaves dressed as silence. The crate went to a ministry storehouse where forgotten things become heavier than their weight. And there it slept, half a century, until my refusal to take a librarian's warning seriously. We've always thought the backward bell was a superstition, but it's simpler than that. The ringing is a key. When names are spoken in a certain rhythm drawn up by lists, printed neat, shouted down streets, or read into a microphone, they become a meal. Our ancestors stopped ringing backward not because the bell failed, but because it worked too well. It drew the ears of something that only knows how to come closer. A short entry, undated, barely a line. The thing that eats names has learned new roads. Its roads are paper. Its roads are wires. I looked up. The archive hummed. Halogen lights smeared white across metal shelves. A motion sensor decided I was a motion and clicked the fans on. Something else too. A bell, distant and wrong. As if someone were practicing a song they didn't know how to end, replaying the last note backward, backward, backward. A new page turned itself. On the margin, in the tight scratch of some clerk who never had time to be careful, a word, watchers. It rings the bell backward every time it stacks names in tidy rows and tells the world what to look at next. This is the part where a narrator is supposed to play brave. I didn't. I put the book back in the box. I taped the box like it mattered. I left the building with the kind of walk you use when you don T-Ron. The horror here isn't new. It's old. It asks, what is the cost of memory? What is the debt of forgetting? We honor the dead by saying their names. We also feed something that only knows how to eat names when we do it in the pattern that sounds like a prayer to the wrong god. She was 80 if she was a day. Her hands were thick with work, fingers like roots. Backring, she said. They told us never. Not since the Fun days. Not since the fog learned how to listen. She turned her face toward a church with a tower that had learned to be humble after a storm took its fang. She climbed the narrow steps with the confidence of a person who had done this through 3 generations of priests. We rang forward. The note split the afternoon like a clean seam. The road outside paused, the way the world pauses when a truth walks through it wearing a sound. Children glanced up. A dog sat without knowing why. Somewhere in me, I felt the backward bell flinch. Not to Aldrich's parish time had swallowed that village and turned its fields into a museum for clouds, but to a place with the same kind of wind. I chose a low tide, the hour when water chooses humility before it remembers how to return. I wrapped the book in wax cloth. I wrote on the cloth, copying Hester's hope, do not open. I tucked it under a slab of slate, mixed mud with salt and lime, and planted a bell rope over it forward knotted. If anyone ever found it, they would have to learn to pull a proper note to get it out. The title waiting in the upload queue. The pattern of names in the comments of other videos. The way platforms make bells of us all, not shelves. A white room. A voice like a clerk without a face asked me to read the names again, slowly, like a lullaby. When I refused, the voice turned the world backward, and I woke with my tongue numb as if I had been pronouncing words that don't like being heard by mouths. I almost didn't publish this. I couldn't risk the backward bell at scale. Then I remembered Meg's hands. Aldrich's candle. Hester's cask. Elsie's stapled linen. They weren't trying to hoard a secret. So here is the rule, simple and stubborn as a parish wall. If you must say a name, ring it forward. Refuse the drumbeat of lists that turn people into entries, into metrics, into someone's chart of content. Do not tally the tolls. Do not listen for your house number woven into a sound meant to unmake you. Stand in your doorway. Say your name the way you would call yourself home. Pull the world forward by one small rope. We honor the past not by feeding what fed on it, but by starving the part of us that loves to count. Someone, maybe Aldrich, maybe Hester, maybe Elsie with her wrists on fire, wrote a last instruction. This has been TruthfallTV. Sleep with the door cracked, a little. And if you dream of bells tonight, make them ring the way the world remembers how to begin.